Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, and welcome to Thursday's tutorial. Today we are painting the Noxious Blightbringer, which is a epic model. I couldn't wait to paint this one. We're doing something a bit different this time. That's why the video is so longer. It's all wet palette work. So we're going to start off here. We've primed him already, and we're going to use Morning Fang Brown by Games Workshop. This is really watered down. Going to be pulling that from the recesses to the highlight areas from the start. We want to layer this up. There's going to be tons of layers in this, and once I've got a nice even coat of that, I'm going to move on to using XV88 by Games Workshop. Now this paint, as you can see here, is very watered down. It's almost a wash consistency, so you're going to be dipping your brush in the paint palette during this and wiping most of that off, so there's just a slight residue left on the brush. And we're going to be pulling that from the shaded area to the light area, so the pigment follows the brush and it stops there. There's quite a bit of footage of me doing this because I'm going to be doing this the whole video, so I'm trying to get as much decent footage in the beginning to show you how this technique works. But the results you're going to get in the end, well worth taking the time over. I mean, it's like a wash, so it's a filter, and it'll just keep building up there over and over again. You let it dry a bit, you put some more on, and starting from the shadow, going back over it, it'll start to build up the layers of colour where your brush ends, without any brush strokes or any of that rubbish that you have to deal with if you're just doing a couple of thin coats. Now the next colour, we're going to do the trim in Castellian Green by Games Workshop. These are just the base colours that I'm putting down to get us started. Again, this is really watered down. Just take your time doing it, because obviously you're going to spend like an hour or two wet blending and glazing those armour plates individually, not as a whole. So it's a bit far away from the heavy metal team style of painting, you know, where there's a couple of colours, filters, and then a highlight. We're doing that, but in a bit more depth. Now the nurgle I wanted on these Death Guard, which are for the Studio Army, I'm doing a demonette hide here because I want to do. I've been mucking about with purples a lot recently. I'm trying to find a purple flesh tone that I like, so I'm doing all the skin on these in the demonette hide to start off with. But if anyone's seen the Poxwalker videos, it's going to be a very similar scheme to that, maybe a few alterations. The cloak has also been glazed. This is like me putting on the third coat there, and that's Naggaroth Night by Games Workshop. Starting in the dark areas, pulling that paint up to the top. Try not to go over the area too much before it dries, otherwise you end up pulling that paint back off. Now the next colour was Green Grey by Model Colour, and I've watered that down. I'm using a Winsor Newton fine brush, and I'm doing exactly what I did to the cloak, but on the nurgle parts. Just pulling from the recesses of his flab folds down to the raised area. Now I'm going to use Xerius Purple by Games Workshop. I can't pronounce that one properly. And putting on less and less paint and working that along those ridges and down the bottom of the cloak as well. You want to pull your brush in the direction you want your highlight to go. That's really important when using a wet palette. Then we're going to mix in Demonette Hide with the Xerius Purple. When I'm mixing these paints in my wet palette, I don't mix the wet paint then add some thick paint in. I tend to mix both of these paints separately. So I'll mix up Demonette Hide so it's really watery in one spot, and then the Xerius Purple in another spot, and somewhere in between I'll get bits on both and mix those up. That way you've got a really watered down consistency. Next we're going to go straight to just using Demonette Hide on its own and bringing up those details a little bit more. All this is really is just lots and lots of layers pulling from the shade to the top, and because you've barely got any paint whatsoever on that brush, then you don't leave any brush strokes or marks, and it blends very smoothly. It's just a matter of patience more than anything. I still think this is demonette hide. Yeah, I think so. Just sort of skipping there and showing you the results after lots and lots of layers. So I've had quite a few people asking on 40k for grown-ups on Facebook how it was done. This is how the cloak was done. Next we're using warpstone bronze to cover the bell, but I'm not covering the entirety of the bell because that'd look plain. I'm going to do the bell itself in the bronze, and then we're going to use lead belcher later on to bring out all the trims and everything on there. Now we're going to add a bit more depth to the edges of the armour as well as the armour itself, using Agrat's Shade watered down a lot with Lamiate Medium. We're not just throwing this wash on, we're actually going to paint it on like we've been doing the glazers. So we're going to paint it the opposite way now. We're going to paint from the light area and pull down to the shaded area. That's going to add a lot more depth and enrich those colours that we've got there. Just take your time doing that and pull it right up to the edge of the greens. The next colour was Drushy Violet, watered down a lot again with Lamiate Medium. You can see it pooling there, but once I've got enough on there, I'm going to use my standard Games Workshop brush and I'm going to pull that down to where I want it to be. I want to keep it watered down because we're going to build up the colours in steps. And you could just throw purple on if you wanted to, but you can either get patches in there or it'll settle where you don't want it to. You can see it's really coming along now, and now we're going to add Drushy Violet and Null Oil, and we're going to focus most of the wash now into that big recess in his cloak so it looks much darker than everything else. It should already look darker if you've blended it and glazed it properly, but I just wanted to add a bit more depth to add to that movement. Now we're going to use XV88 again after the wash, and we're going to do exactly what we did in the first part of the video, except we're going to start a bit further away from the shade so you can see the transition of the Morning Fang, the wash, the XV88, and we're just going to start a little bit further in there and do each individual pallet and bit of armour. Now to tone down the shoulder pads a bit and give those a bit of depth, we mixed Athonian Camo Shade and Null Oil 50-50, and then we put in a bunch of Lamiate Medium again. At this point I think I'm just going to stop telling you that we're using Lamiate Medium on all these. I'm pretty much going to be using it for the entirety of the video. Any wash I put on is heavily watered down with Lamiate Medium, so I can put it in several layers and start pushing it into the recesses, which adds more depth than just putting it on its own. Now we're going to use Skaven Blight Dinge, really watered down. This takes a lot of coats. There's a lot of details in these things. I could have done them bone, but because the armour is already sort of weathered bone look, it needed to be something different. So I've gone with the Skaven Blight Dinge to take those to a sort of grey level. Then we're switching to a Storm Vermin Fur, and we're going to follow all those highlighted areas, all the raised bits. We're doing the same thing we've been doing on the armour all along. We're just going to keep pulling the recess from the recesses to the light area with wet palette paint, so it's a really soft transition all the way through. That's going to be very time consuming on that bit, but the end result's definitely worth it, guys. You can see how it builds up there in that corner, which is where you want the light. It's also kind of tricky because I wanted to have the bottom of the entire thing darker, so I'm going to start using some washers after that, starting halfway up and then pulling down using Null Oil. And as I'm getting to the top, I'm drying the top of where I want the transition to end. I'm drying the brush off and just pulling that pigment around so it separates more, making a softer transition. Now we're going to go back to the Storm Vermin Fur and start picking out those bits again, because all this Null Oil wash here is just basically a filter, and all that clean brushwork you've done will now look even smoother. So we're going back to Storm Vermin Fur, going over the previous Storm Vermin Fur, leaving some in the recesses and other areas, just really heightening all those spiky bits and twisted bits and all those gaps. Warp Block Bronze was then, and Lead Belcher was then mixed together. Although I didn't like the result of this, so I will change it later, so you could just skip this part. This Oh, sorry, I've missed that. Storm Vermin Fur, sorry, and now Sky Grey on top of the Storm Vermin Fur. I went too far down the paint list. And Sky Grey is from model colour. Again, just mixed in the wet palette and built up. Now we're on to the Lead Belcher mixed with Warp Block Bronze. Didn't like the result. Again, pulling from the recesses and trying to go for a different style of paint scheme for this tutorial was quite a challenge, but I wanted to do something different with this guy. I've been looking forward to painting him since we got the box set. But I will change this later on. I could have really edited that out. Then we're going to use just Lead Belcher on its own to cover the trims. I could edit it out, but it is a filter and it is on there and it's been painted over, so if you wanted to get an exact copy of that paint, it would have those colours underneath it. So it's entirely up to you how you paint that bit, but I just wasn't happy with the result, so I changed it. I didn't paint the skulls for this bit either, I left the skulls. Now we're going to water down Recklon Flesh Shade and start like a quarter of the way up on the horns, and we're going to bring that Recklon Flesh Shade from that part down into the recesses. And because we've watered these down and we're building these washes up layer over layer, they're going to show through each other, adding a lot more depth and a lot more darkness to these horns at the bottom, which is really what I wanted to go for. Then using Null Oil and went over all the nurgle bits. I think somewhere on the model I've missed one or two parts that I didn't realise were there. Plus it's also Thursday afternoon, so I'm still working on this today. And I had to sort of rush through the last bits to get it finished. Now we're going to start using Xandri Dust over the XV88 highlight that we're doing, and we're going to start bringing up some real bright hotspots on the armour. Just carrying on the pattern that you've already started, because if you try and change it with that colour, it's not going to filter right. So wherever you've started to get highlighted spots, you just want to keep working on those to exaggerate them. Then the chains and everything, I'd made my mind up at this point. I used Lead Belcher. But we're not painting the balls that colour, we're going to do those in a bit. They've got quite a few different colours on them. So we're using Warp Block Bronze for the entirety of the balls. I'm not sure what they are, they look like some like they should have smoke or something coming out of them. But yeah, just be really careful with this one, and you don't need to paint the insides of the balls because we're going to put washers on, and later in the end of this video I'm going to show you a bunch of effects that were added to this model, and how you can fill in those details if you just being lazy, or you've made a mistake and you want to cover it up with all these other rust effects and streaking grimes. Now after we've done the Warpstone Bronze, we're using Warpstone Bronze mixed 50-50 with Brass Scorpion, and this, I've not tried this combination of colours before, but it works so well to highlight these. Where the three circles are, there's a centre bit, and what we're doing is we're going to pull those colours to the centre of that and really make that ball look even more round and with more detail to it, so it really pops out. Now Iron Breaker was used on the tips of the chains. This is to brighten it up before we put a wash on. Just on all the edges, and at this point you don't need to be too careful with that because we're going to put a bunch more detail in on there as well. But it's just to break up that plain flat silver colour. Now we're going to go over all these metallic parts with Recklon Flesh Shade, which is a bit odd because usually we'd use Agrak Fur Shade, but I wanted them to look a bit more rich and warm in comparison to the cold nurgle, which are all purple blue tints. You just want to be careful you don't get this on any other part of your model, because the way all these bits are hanging off, it can be a bit awkward. Now I'm moving on to the base coat for the plasma pistol, which is going to be done in Macragge blue. It took a couple of coats of this because it's really watered down. I didn't want to lose any detail on this model. But just using that Winsor Newton and picking out all those little rivets on there, well, all those dips, making sure you've got a nice even coat. Then while that's drying, I'm going to skip and go back to Castilian green and start re-highlighting these shoulder pads. But I'm not going to do the regular highlight that you'll see people do, just doing all the edges. I'm going to do what we've done on the armour and just bring that colour from with the wet palette up from the shade to the recesses, but only on the high spots. So I'm not following the entire pattern there. And after that's done, I'm going back to the plasma gun to use Aldorf Guard blue, really watered down. And to do the sort of OSL glowing effect on these, you start in the middle and you pull your paint from each side, from the top and from the bottom, but you pull them all to the middle after you put the middle in, and you'll start to get a nice blue transition there. I'm working with the edge there, then I'll flip it round, do the other edge, and then do the middle again to really build that up. Then Aldorf Guard blue mixed with a tiny bit of Rakarth flesh, and you're just making this area smaller and smaller. As you can see, it's starting to lighten up quite a bit in the middle. Just remember to do both sides of that, and then go into the middle. It's really about the direction that you pull in your brush. You want to pull your brush to where the paint wants to be. I know that sounds simple, but with a model like this that's difficult to hold, people overlook that and just try and get it from the angle that they want. But even when you do, you still got to do the same sort of techniques. Then I switched to Atlantic blue and Rakarth flesh, which was a bit of a jump, so I watered it down considerably, and now I'm just working solely in the middle there. It's so watered down, it's almost like a wash, so it'll just settle without any brush strokes and really blend smooth. And at this point in the video, I'll start adding in a bunch more highlights using Rakarth flesh. So then I mix Castilian green and Rakarth flesh. It's really up to you, the ratios, it depends how bright you want it. I started working all the paint towards the edges of the rest of the plating, and go over the ones we've already done as well, but we're not covering the whole things, just the sharp points and other random details on there. As you can see at this point, I decided to paint the skulls on the bell in the same sort of colour and the skulls on the armpit. Then it's another Reckland flesh shade wash on all of the nurgle parts, but for the bits at the feet, I'm blending the armour of the feet to the nurgle using the Reckland flesh shade. Now this is going on quite thick, but I do dry my brush off camera and wipe most of this off because I want a pretty strong filter there. Now we're going to use Slaanesh grey and Administerium grey mixed together and keep going over those nurgle parts, all over the nurgling, just picking out final bits there, anything where it's got flab folds and you want those to really look like they're sticking out, and exaggerate those a bit more. Then Sky Grey was used on all of his warts. It was watered down, but at this point I'm basically covering the entirety of that wart because I'm going to put more washes and filters on it. And on the Poxwalker one I did that, but it looked good on camera, but what had happened was it looked a lot darker when the washes went on. So then we're using a Carroburg Crimson watered down, and we're going to push that into all the underneath of all the folds and around the warts. Around the neck, don't forget to do his butt crack and everything else. Just working that round there. And then using just brass scorpion for the end of the gun. I could not decide what colour to do with this. I was going to do it a pale, a light white colour, but then it would take away from the model too much, so I did it brass scorpion, and you know, I washed that down with Reckland flesh shade like I did everything else, so it wasn't too far away from the other colours. I was then using Ironbreaker to go around the outsides of those circles ever so gently, just at the tops and the bottoms more than anything where the light would catch. And now we're on to the effects, guys. If you've been watching this far, well done. And this is Abdelung's odorless turpentine, and it's mixed with oil paint, and you can see there, that's the sort of consistency you want. You put a dot on your skin and the oil just runs straight through all the grooves in your skin. So what we're going to do here is use a tiny brush from Army Painter, which holds the oil quite well, and basically when what you can see in a minute is it will just run across all the edges. As you can see, I've gloss varnished the entire model to protect it, but it'll also, the gloss will change the surface texture of that, and because the surface texture has been changed, the oil can run smoothly and will just sit in all of the recesses. But don't put the oil wash on the cloak, because that'll spoil it, and don't put it on your nurgle either, because you'll start to lose your blending. So now, Streaking Grime by AK Interactive, we're going to use a little bit of odorless turpentine here as well to keep it thin, and we're just going to put little drops of that into all of the holes in his armour, which will add a much more depth than is already there. There's quite a few holes there, you want to be careful. You can also pull this down and out of the thing as it dries with a little bit of terps on your brush, so that you get more streaks coming out of the rust holes and everything. Now this is my favourite one, it's a Model Mates Rust Effect. See, I've now matted him down a bit and given him another varnish, so he's pretty much finished at this point, but the Model Mates Rust Effect is just the finishing touches. See, I'd not done the nurgle symbol at the back, but like I was saying, I can use Model Mates Rust Effect to just do anything I want really with nurgle. It's really forgiving, and we're going to put blobs and dots of this into a lot of the metallic grooves around the chains and things like that. Just don't forget to paint the nails in that big bit of wood or horn or whatever it is a metallic colour before you do this. I use lead belcher because you can occasionally see bits of it through the model colour. Yeah, this bit of footage is a bit long, but I wanted to show you what it was like to work with and how it went on. And there you have it, guys. One Noxious Blightbringer is pretty much finished. I'm just going to need to stick him on a base and he's ready for the studio army. So I hope you liked this video, and I hope you watched it all the way through, and if you did, hit that like, hit subscribe, don't forget to share with your friends, guys. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.